Assalamu alaikum. Shalom aleichem. Peace and blessings on you all. Eid Mubarak, Eid al-Adha Mubarak for our Muslim sisters and brothers the next 24 hours. This is my third time in Belfast. Third visit to Northern Ireland. I've just been through the Republic of Ireland for the second time. And I find, as many other people do, striking parallels in different conflict situations. So if I'd like to try in 10 to 15 minutes to make links between the situation here and the tragedy still unfolding in Israel-Palestine. Here, after the Good Friday Agreement in '98, you might speak about post-traumatic stress in Israel-Palestine. There's no peace agreement that really has stuck, so there's no post-anything. People are living the trauma every day still. And somebody was talking about the little blue pill yesterday, Valium, right? It was either Barry or his colleague on the bus. Okay, when the second Intifada erupted in September 2000, there were animals that were prescribed Valium. There were animals suffering anxiety, household pets. And the little dog we had in our home in Jerusalem would, when helicopters went overhead and there were explosions, would go into the closet and hide. So they were teenagers wetting their beds. One of the hardest days of my life was attending two funerals back to back of two women I knew who'd been stabbed to death, along with two other women at a bus stop about a minute from my home in West Jerusalem. And on another occasion, a bus blew up, taking 11 Jews and the Palestinian bomb carrier to their deaths, almost in the same place, about a minute from my home. So I moved from the United States, where I'd grown up, to Israel, to Jerusalem, in 1978. As a human being, I wanted to strengthen the Jewish part of my identity, or bring it into balance with my human, universal identity, global identity, and I felt that the best place to do that was in Jerusalem, which is a holy city to several monotheistic traditions, and is a center of messianic hope and expectation, and in the meantime, a center of deep division and conflict, hostility, misunderstanding, trauma. So Jerusalem is a kind of laboratory, a microcosm of the human family and its sufferings and challenges. And I worked from the three things I did in the 24 years I lived in Israel before returning to the United States to work at Harvard Seminary as an associate professor of interfaith relations along with Christian and Muslim colleagues, parentheses, a position I relinquished about a month and a half ago, so I'm no longer on that faculty. I moved from the United States to this war zone in the Middle East to try to bring my faith to test it out in a laboratory which was full of trauma and tragedy. And to me, the Torah, the Hebrew Scriptures, the revelation at Sinai and afterwards, is meant to be lived out there. And all the messianic and prophetic aspirations for peace, swords into plowshares, everybody sitting under a vine and fig tree and nobody terrifying him or her, that's the testing ground. So for me, I had the privilege as the first one in my family for countless generations in 2,000 years to go to a sovereign Jewish state, which is in a state of war with the Palestinian people, the Sha'ab al-Falastini, who share the land with us. One land claimed by two peoples of several religious traditions. And the question for me as a religious person is how do we consecrate the land together through justice and loving kindness, inclusive justice and loving kindness, compassion, instead of desecrating it together through injustice and violent action, usually justified in the name of security or self-defense. We have very clever ideologies, rationalizations for doing the horrific things that we do to one another. In a very short time, I want to go from the macro to the micro and back to the macro. Let's see if I can do this. I don't have a stopwatch, but you can tell me when my time is up, okay? All right. Derry / Londonderry is called Stroke City. You know that in Northern Ireland? Okay. So it depends if you're a Catholic Republican nationalist or you're a Protestant Unionist loyalist, you will call it either Derry or Londonderry. Okay, so Israel-Palestine, I call the Stroke Holy Land. Jerusalem, Al-Quds Sharif, is the Stroke Holy City. Hebron Al-Khalil is the second holiest place. It's Stroke City. So it depends on which historical lens, narrative, perspective, existential coordinates you use. Okay, so language matters, words matter, and I try to be fair, inclusive in my vocabulary. You may have noticed, if you've gone around Belfast, there are Palestinian flags in Catholic areas and Israeli flags in Protestant areas. Isn't that, well, what's your reaction? Are you amused? Are you confused? I'm saddened. This is no news to me, I know of this. But how many of these people living around here have ever met an Israeli or a Palestinian before putting their flags to identify with one side or another in that conflict? Probably very, very few. So they have some kind of mythic projection of who Israelis are and who Palestinians are, and then they choose to identify out of their own self-referencing experiences with one or the other. And I think that that just adds fuel to the conflict because, and I think as global citizens, we need to really develop the kind of empathy that Dr. Puma was talking about to all sides. All sides. There aren't even two. We shouldn't have binary thinking. All sides in any particular conflict. We have to understand, listen to their stories, their sufferings, their joys, their aspirations, before we start hanging up partisan flags, which is a very reductionistic, simplistic, and dualistic mistake, I think. I met George Mitchell once and had a conversation with him about the work he had done here in Northern Ireland. And he said, you know, everybody talks about the Good Friday Agreement. People don't realize we had 700 bad days on the way to that one Good Friday. Wow. A deep thought. To be persistent in the face of constant pain, trauma, hostility. This takes such an expansive heart. It's not for everybody. And even for those who are called to do this, it may require a long-term prescription in blood pressure medication. If you're not up to it, teach mathematics. If you want to go into peace building, check out your physiological capacity. So how do we see a conflict situation not in binary terms of mutual exclusion, but in complementary terms of mutual inclusion? That's the cognitive shift. That, I think, follows an emotional capacity to expand our hearts to embrace the different realities that seem to be on the surface in conflict, but at a deeper level are necessary for the structure of shalom, as salam, peace, to be built. And there is a rabbi, a great rabbi from 200 some odd years ago, Rabbi Nachman of Wroclaw, who talked about the different elements of reality that seem to be in conflict that need to be integrated. Rabbi Cook, who was chief rabbi under the British Mandate in Palestine from 1921 until his death in 1935, also taught, he was a mystic as well, as Rabbi Nachman was, that what appears on the surface to be adversarial, oppositional, they are really necessary, complementary building blocks for the structure of peace to be built. And we don't know that yet, most of us. But in the end, whether in this life or beyond, we will understand that on the religious level, let's say, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all blessed by God and are part of God's plan for consecration and redemption. Israel and Palestine, Ireland and England, after a much longer struggle, right, 700-800 years, Ireland and England, are necessary partners in neighborly, mutual validation. But when you live in the middle of a conflict and you're suffering, it's very hard, almost impossible to see it, which is why third parties are necessary to help both conflicting sides to understand, begin to understand and empathize with the so-called enemy. Okay, the micro story I want to tell you, and I invite you to see the whole story on the web, is Open House, the peace center that my former wife and Palestinian partners in Israel and in Palestine created, is a symbolic house and garden in the middle of the mixed city, Ramle, R-A-M-L-E, near Tel Aviv, not to be confused with Ramallah, the high place of God. Ramle comes from Ramle in Arabic, meaning sand. It's a very nitty-gritty working class city that used to be an all-Arab town with Christians and Muslims, founded by the Caliph Suleiman in 716, to be the capital of the new district within the expanding Muslim empire. In 1948, the Israeli military took it over in what we call the War of Independence, and the Palestinians call Al-Nakba, the Great Catastrophe. And the Israeli soldiers were given the order from David Ben-Gurion, who was prime minister and defense minister, to expel the population, lest a fifth column be created within the state of Israel, which was trying to assert itself as an independent Jewish state. So, in Ramla and the neighboring town of El-Lid, Lida, Lod in Hebrew, over 95% of the population, 75,000 people, a tenth of the whole Palestinian refugee population that experienced exodus and exile, were forced out, which left a lot of empty homes. My former wife, Dalia, as an infant, less than a year old, came with 50,000 Bulgarian Jewish refugees who had survived the Holocaust. That's a whole story in and of itself. And ended up 50,000 Bulgarian Jews were the first wave of immigrants to enter the new Jewish state. And the government put these refugee families in the homes of Palestinian refugees who'd gone outside. So this is a symbolic microcosm. The two families met at the door in 1967. Dalia, now a young woman, welcomed Bashir al-Khairi, who came on a visit with his two cousins to his family home. That began a relationship that extends until today, and the product of that relationship between two families sharing one home, the way two people share a homeland, is a peace education laboratory called Open House. El Beit HaMaftuach in Arabic, Habayit HaPatuach. In Hebrew, I'll just send you to the web for the whole story, including Dalia's TED Talk. www.friendsofopenhouse, one long word, .co.il. friendsofopenhouse.co.il. It is a truth and reconciliation laboratory, which we just heard about at the macro level in South Africa. I believe that Israelis and Palestinians need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We don't yet have an FW de Klerk, Nelson Mandela, and Desmond Tutu. I can give you my candidates for the counterparts in Israel and Palestine, but I can name them, but they're not in power today because we're still stuck in this mutual negation, this adversarial, mutual, I call it antagonistic interdependence. We need the enemy to define ourselves over against. For me, the tragic The worst situation for me, in terms of asserting myself collectively as a Jew anywhere on the planet, but especially as an Israeli citizen, which I am in addition to an American citizen, would see Judaism or the national liberation perspective called Zionism, returning to Zion, which is the mystical prophetic name for the Holy Land, to see Judaism or Zionism reduced to anti-Semitism, which is a double negative. And it means you need enemies. You need Jew haters to define yourself over against. Isn't that sad? I wouldn't want to educate children going into the future to require people to be antagonistic to us in order to assert ourselves. So Palestinians have an anti-Zionism, Israelis have an anti-Palestinianism, and we're killing ourselves and robbing our children of a healthy future in the process. And what I believe in is the process, or in this part of the world I have to say process, the process of social transformation from the ground up rather than peace agreements negotiated like the Oslo Accord in 1993. Arafat, Rabin, and Peres, look where we are today. Because the people were not prepared for that transformation. So, from that micro story, I go back in 60 seconds to the macro transformation that's needed. So from the bottom up, we need a truth and reconciliation, a catharsis, a healing, leading to mutual acceptance and ideally forgiveness that requires mutual repentance, and acts of atonement, of reconciliation, is what's happening at Open House is a laboratory for that. I don't talk about two states. I think that's misleading. If anything, I don't want to prescribe what the outcome will end up politically, but I think it will probably be closer to a four-state arrangement. I don't use the word solution, with a Jewish majority state called Israel. Two states of Palestine federated in the United States of Palestine, run by Islamists, Hamas believers in Gaza, and more secular nationalists like Fatah people in Ramallah, in the West Bank. The two of them, Palestine and Israel, confederated with Urdun, with Jordan, on the other side of the Jordan River. So instead of Benelux, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, inshallah, God willing, Be'ezrat Hashem, we'll have something called Isfalur, Israel, Palestine, Urdun, in our lifetimes. Okay, last thing I want to say, on one trip to Belfast, in 1997, a year before the Good Friday Agreement, I met with, I had a Palestinian Muslim brother and met and representatives of other religious traditions in an interfaith delegation. We met with 150 high school students, 50 students in shamrock green uniforms from a Catholic school, 50 students in t-shirts and jeans, that was their uniform, from an integrated school. And I asked them this question: how many of you think there'll be a peace agreement here in your lifetime? 150 students, one of them began to hesitatingly raise his hand, and then he realized he was all alone and he put it down. I said, look, we had the Oslo Accord, right? We had the Camp David Agreement before that. We've had two peace agreements, Israel and Egypt, Israel and the Palestinians. Why not here? We're the same human species, the same potential. Why not here? Don't give up hope. And a year later, the Good Friday Agreement happened. Now I don't have illusions that these transformations happen instantaneously. It's going to take 1 to 2, maybe 3 generations. And the youth are the key to the future. You have to give them experiences of equality and mutual interdependence in order to grow up knowing that peace is possible. Because otherwise they'll be very skeptical and they'll think, as I've been told, what planet are you from? In thinking that peace is possible here. And I say, Mother Earth.